Hello and welcome to the Confusion to Clarity podcast. This podcast is for anybody who needs that reminder that they really are capable of achieving amazing things. Each week, we will be diving deep into all things mindset, manifestation, and spirituality. Hosted by me, Natalie, a clinical hypnotherapist, psychotherapist, coach, mum, and lover of all things mindset and manifestation. When listening, I want to give you a break from reality. I'm going to share with you the tools and techniques that you need to make your goals reality so you can stop playing small. Hello and welcome back to the Confusion to Clarity podcast. I hope you are all well and have had an amazing week. Now, you may have noticed there wasn't an episode released last week, and I was really annoyed with myself because one of my goals this year was to record a podcast episode every single week. But as I will explain shortly, it was quite the week and I felt very stressed. What with juggling work, it was a really busy work week, which I'm always super grateful for. I love my job. But obviously it's school holidays, I've got the kids off, so I have my Ubering duties to do, chauffeuring the kids around. It was just a lot. So I was frustrated with myself, but then I thought, no, what would I tell a client? And I would say, actually, do you know what? Sometimes you need to give yourself permission to make a decision that best serves you. And I just thought if I put an episode out, it's probably not going to be the best. And I love my podcast and I always want every episode to give as much value as it possibly can. So I decided to give myself grace, not release one last week, let the guilt go. And then I thought, well, actually, last week and the stress would make a good episode for this week because it's something that comes up a lot with my clients. And I thought if it comes up with my clients and I'm personally relating to it, then I'm sure you listening may also resonate with it. So today we're going to be talking all about how you don't have to have everything figured out today. Today being the operative word. So that's the theme of this week's episode. So why was my week really stressful? So I don't want to overshare, but probably will because that's me. So it didn't start off stressful. It actually started really positively. So last Sunday, I'm not a really spontaneous person. I'm more of an overthinker planner type of person. But I went to Brighton in the afternoon for a walk along the seafront. And it was Pride last weekend, and they have, I didn't know, they have like a Pride street festival. The whole road was closed off, loads of acts and bands, and it was really cool. And we were standing there listening. Anyway, we ended up getting tickets. So we'd gone out for a walk, then ended up going like out, and it was really, really good fun. And it finished about like 9:30, 10. And I was like, oh, I don't want to go home now. I've kind of got into the kind of the mood for going out. So we ended up going to a bar. Now, I was driving, I wasn't drinking. However, I did contemplate, this is how spontaneous I was being, to like drink and leave my car and get the train home. Fortunately, I had the thought come into my head that that would be a big regret. The trains would be busy and you've got to get to the station, get the train home, get home from the station. Like, no. So didn't drink, drove, but it was still really late night. We didn't get home till about 2 a.m, which I haven't been out ages. So we went out for a walk and ended up going out and getting home at 2 a.m. Well, it was fine until Monday morning came round and I felt like crap. I really felt like I had a hangover. I was like, oh God, it was fun, but like regretting it now, well, kind of. And I thought, don't worry, it's fine. Don't worry, it's fine. You can have an early night tonight. You don't have any calls this evening. You can go to bed nice and early. No, the universe had other ideas. So I was on the way back from picking up my daughter from running. Now, I wasn't going to go, but my husband was going to take her. And then I said, oh, I've not watched her run for ages. I'll come. I don't have anything on. I thought I'll watch her run, come home, go to bed early. And as we were driving home, as luck would have it, suddenly the van lost power. We were on quite a busy road. We managed to coast off of a busy road and it just died. It kind of in the middle of nowhere. We were actually on the way from running to go pick up my eldest daughter from her friends. Thank goodness her friend's dad was so lovely. He agreed to come and pick me up, drop Nicole home, also picked up Darcy, took us home so I could go and get my car to then go back to the van. So we phoned I won't say the company name, but the breakdown company. And this was about 7 p.m. I nearly said 7 a.m. then 7 p.m. So, okay, fine. It was really hot and they were obviously very busy. So, okay, fine, we'll wait. And they said it'd be like an hour, waited. And it was getting later and later because you can check on the app. they didn't end up coming out until it was like 1:20 in the morning. We were sat there in the middle of nowhere till 1:20 in the morning, and for them to say no, we can't fix it, so we had to leave it and then go back and sort it the next day. And it's of course it's a major fault with the van, thousands of pounds worth of repairs. So like, excellent, great start to the week. So that kind of set things off. But if you listen to the podcast regularly, you will know that pretty much the exact same thing happened to me literally a year ago. So this happened on the Monday. The Wednesday of that week was a year since my car broke down. So I was even further from home with the kids on my own, driving back, and my car, the engine blew up on my car, my lovely car, which wasn't even old, it was a new car. The engine just, blew up on me, and we were stranded in the middle of nowhere again till 1:30 in the morning, and it was so stressful. So when it happened again, I literally felt my chest tightening, almost like feeling like I was gonna have a panic attack of like, oh my god, not again. Because with my car, it was £20,000 worth of damage. Not that you need to know this, but I'm in the mood for oversharing. The part that went on my car shouldn't have gone, and it's taken a year to get this sorted. I've had to escalate it through the ombudsman. It's been a real stress, and I've only literally just got a resolution sorted. So I've been hiring a car for a year, really stressful. And then this with the van, I'm like, excellent. So when you just feel like it's quite a lot in 1 week. What with everything else, it's a lot. So I really had to take a step back last week and think, look, you can't figure this all out in 1 day. What are your things to sort in this situation? What aren't? Put boundaries in place. And I thought, let's talk about this today. It's already been 7 minutes, but I like detail in a story, if you haven't gathered that by now with the podcast. Before my mind had slowed down, just going back a little bit, my brain went into overdrive. It was almost as though somewhere in my mind there was a belief that, like, if I could just get everything sorted, everything decided, everything resolved, then I can relax and I can be ahead of the game. And I think this was also like past trauma from last year kicking in as well. So I got to a point where I had to sit there and say to myself, look, okay, you're not necessarily overwhelmed because all these things need dealing with right now. You're overwhelmed because your brain is telling you that all of these things need doing now. And there's a difference, because they don't, but that part of your brain that's trying to problem solve, keep you safe, is telling you, oh yes, we do need to get this figured out right now. And it was going to extremes. It was really going into catastrophization mode. Now, I think in these situations, it's always really important not to gaslight yourself, because sometimes we do genuinely have a lot going on. And I never want to be one of those people that tells you, oh, we can figure everything out just by like doing some deep breathing or going for a walk. Sometimes life can be genuinely difficult and genuinely testing. Perhaps there's a situation where there's a big bill that needs paying. Sometimes you might be faced, I don't know, with having to have like a difficult conversation with somebody. Maybe you're in a difficult, complicated relationship. And sometimes there are decisions that need making, and maybe sometimes they do need making sooner rather than later. And those things are real. We can't, gaslight ourselves into thinking that that's not the case. But something being a real problem doesn't automatically make it an immediate problem. And I think that's the differentiation. And that's the theme that I wanted to explore here today, because that was the conversation I had to have with myself. Because sometimes the most helpful thing you can do isn't actually figure everything out. It's actually to stop trying to figure everything out. And that can feel really counterintuitive, which makes it even harder to get on board with that. So when everything really starts to feel urgent and pressing, when we're feeling anxious or stressed or overwhelmed, our brain becomes much more focused on the threat. And obviously, if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you would have heard me speak about this before. But our subconscious brains, I can't speak, I'm still tired from last week. Our subconscious brain, its primary job isn't to make us happy, it's to keep us alive. It's all about safety and familiarity. So when our nervous system picks up that something isn't quite right, then our brains are going to start scanning for danger. what do I need to know? What should I anticipate? What could go wrong? What am I missing? How did I deal with this before? Questions like that. And you can probably relate to thoughts like that yourself, because there's one thing that an anxious mind really struggles with is uncertainty, because uncertainty equates to I don't know. And that primitive part of our brain doesn't like I don't know. It would much rather have an answer. And if there isn't a kind of clear logical answer, then your brain will start to create an answer. And as is often the case, the answer that it comes up with is probably going to be the worst case scenario. Because if your brain knows or believes that it has a way of dealing with it, then it's trying to create certainty. And our brains can get quite creative in this area. Maybe you find yourself replaying a conversation 20 times, trying to work out exactly what somebody meant by what they said, that tone, or they sounded like that tone was off when they said that, or they said that before and they meant this. Maybe you send screenshots to 3 friends and ask them what they think. Maybe you are constantly checking your phone, you're googling on overdrive or chat GPTing, my friend, my go-to ally. Maybe you spend hours researching something, or another popular method is to mentally rehearse conversations. How many of us have had conversations in our head fictitiously? Right, if she says this, then I'll say that, and if they do this, then I'll say that, and you end up making hypothetical situations really horrific, and often they're things that are probably never going to happen or are very unlikely to happen. Maybe your way of coping is to ask people's opinion. What would you do? What do you think? Do you think I'm right? What do you think this means? And again, it's all about seeking safety. If other people can reassure you when things are out of control, it gives your brain that little glimmer of, okay, maybe we're going to be okay. But the problem here is sometimes there isn't an answer yet. And when there isn't an answer, thinking harder doesn't necessarily create one. What it often does is just create more noise, more stress, more anxiety. Something I want you to think about is this: overthinking often masquerades as problem solving, and they can feel the same, and that's the tricky thing. You can sit there for 2 hours thinking about something and feel as though you're being so productive. I'm working this out, but actually, are you? Because often there's a difference between thinking that moves you towards a solution and thinking that keeps you circling over a problem. And I just want to caveat in here, because this might sound a bit contradictory, but it is kind of different. Some people process by repeating things. So I've had people say this to me before. One person in particular who wasn't very nice to me, she would always say, like, you repeat yourself, you always repeat yourself. And it used to make me feel so humiliated, until through my own therapy and self-discovery work, I'm like, that's how I process trauma situations. I might talk about it a lot, I might think about it a lot, but then I get to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm done thinking about this, like that makes sense. Not in a catastrophizing he said she said type of way, it's more like replaying the event over. And I just wanted to kind of caveat that there, because a lot of people are very much the same. So you know you better than everybody, and I think you can genuinely even feel the difference. Thinking about something, trying to make sense of it, feels a little bit more calmer. When you're overthinking something, trying to find a solution, and it's more anxiety led, you're going to get that niggly feeling in your stomach, the jittery sensations. So I think it's really worth tuning into yourself and just starting to identify like what the voice is. But yeah, if you've been sat there for hours just thinking, it's not productive. You're probably not problem solving anymore. What you are doing is looping and getting stuck in a cycle. And again, this is where the feeling is really important. And because the difficult thing is, when you're in that state, your brain will tell you, let's just think about it a little longer. Because somewhere hidden inside thought number 3847 is the answer. But quite often there isn't, because the information you need might not exist yet. Maybe you're waiting for somebody else to make a decision. Maybe you're waiting for the garage to come back and tell you how much the repairs are. Maybe a circumstance could change. Maybe you simply haven't experienced enough yet to know what it is you actually want in a situation. Cliched, but it is so useful and so true. Maybe you need to sleep on it. And obviously, we've all heard that saying, like, sleep on it. But there is truth in that, because when you are sleeping, when you're going through your REM cycles, your brain is clearing out. It's getting rid of things that don't need to be there. So when you do wake in the morning, often you might find that a situation feels calmer, or you do have a solution, or you see something differently to how you were seeing it the day before. Maybe you need some space from the situation, like physically take yourself away. And maybe the answer just isn't available on Tuesday afternoon. And that doesn't mean you've failed to find it. It just means you don't know it yet. Like, most of people listening to this, we're not psychic. If you are, please feel free to share any lottery numbers with me. That'd be great. But yeah, most of us, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't have psychic skills and abilities. We can't forecast the future. And that's not comforting to an anxious mind. So it's bringing it back to, does this need my attention now? Does it need it right now? Is the question to ask yourself. And I found myself asking that a lot last week. Does this need solving right now? Am I just overthinking? Is there something more pressing that I should be doing? So these are two completely different questions. Does this need my attention, or does this need my attention right now? And maybe, I know you might have to make a decision about your career, and yes, that needs your attention, but does that need deciding tonight? Possibly not. You might have something going on financially, and maybe, yes, that does need dealing with, but is there anything you can actually do that's logical, tangible at 10:30 at night while you're laying in bed? Probably not. You might feel uncertain about a relationship, and of course, yes, that is always important, but you don't need to decide the entire future of that relationship while you're exhausted, upset, emotionally activated. And sometimes we need to give ourselves permission to put something down without pretending that it doesn't exist. And I think this is the key thing. This is not about gaslighting ourselves, because this is the distinction. I'm not telling you to bury your head in the sand. I'm not telling you to avoid difficult things. I'm not telling you to avoid difficult things. What I'm saying is, you are allowed to choose when you engage with them.
Are you pregnant or recently postpartum and struggling with substance use? Or do you know someone who is?
You're not alone. I'm Amani Wilson.
And I'm Dr. Farzad Kamyar. On Empowered Voices, Recovery to Resiliency, we bring to light the challenges and triumphs of families navigating substance use during and after pregnancy.
Through compelling stories, expert insights, and actionable guidance, we aim to empower listeners with understanding, compassion, and tools for support.
Join our community where compassion replaces judgment.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, because every mother deserves support and the chance to thrive.
This autonomy over yourself. You can say to yourself, this matters. I'm going to deal with it, but I'm not going to deal with it right now. That's not avoidance, that's discernment. And the more you can practice coming from this place, the more you regain control over those anxious thoughts and feelings. And I'm not saying it's easy, absolutely not. It's a skill. And as you've seen, it's a skill I'm still practicing too. But the one thing I really said to myself last week was regulate first, solve second. So it brings me now to probably what I feel is the most important part of the message, the sermon I'm sharing today, and the thing that I want you to take away is to regulate yourself first, solve second. Because when your nervous system is highly activated, you're trying to think your way out of a psychological state. Because when your nervous system is highly activated, you're often trying to think your way out. Because when your nervous system is highly activated, what you're normally doing, you're often doing, is trying to think your way out of a physiological state. Your chest feels tight, your stomach is churning, your blood feels like it's boiling, your shoulders are kind of up around your ears, your heart's racing, you're jumping between scenarios in your mind. And your first response is, right, I need to think harder. And that's the kind of point where I'm like, no, sometimes you need to stop thinking, because when our stress response is activated, our thinking naturally becomes more focused on threat. It becomes more black and white, more reactive, and we struggle to see alternatives. And we can then interpret, as I've been saying, the uncertainty as danger. And that's why when you go to bed, convinced that something, absolutely awful is happening, is, everything's a catastrophe. And that's why you can go to bed convinced that something is an absolute catastrophe, go to sleep, wake up the next morning, and then think to yourself, oh, actually, maybe there are a couple of ways that I can deal with this. And it's not necessarily the problem has changed, but what has is your state of being. And when your state changes, your perception of the problem can change too, which is why regulating your nervous system isn't some fluffy topic that I like to talk about. Like, genuinely, it is one of the most important things you can do when you are in a dysregulated, highly stressed state. And sometimes it is the thing that enables you to begin the process of sorting out the important things. So for me last week, that was like going for a walk. I really focused on doing the Wim Hof breath work, doing somatic shaking, and being really consistent with those. Also being really strict with screen time as well. So not being on social media doom scrolling, because I think, again, when we're stressed, our natural instinct can be like pick up the phone and just scroll through and watch different stupid videos, and I'm like, oh no, but I just need to like watch this because it is really trivial, and actually it's taking me away from my thoughts. But it's actually not. It's fueling your body with dopamine and keeping you highly activated. Sometimes it could be things like just having something to eat. If you're really stressed and your hunger is suppressed, again, maybe just eating something, regulating your blood sugar, fueling your body can be a way of, formulating solutions from a calmer state. Because realistically, no problems are solved on a coffee and half a banana. Sometimes it is something like sleeping. And sometimes that is saying to yourself even, I'm not thinking about this again tonight. And you can actually say that out loud to yourself. I'm not telling you to talk to yourself, but sometimes just having a firm, we're not talking about this right now, I'm not thinking about this right now, is a really good way of beginning the process of retraining your brain in stressful situations. And again, like I've said, this can feel really counterintuitive, and you will find that part of your brain fighting against it with like a yeah but, because it's trying to say to your anxious brain, it's saying to you, but if we stop thinking about it, then we're not doing anything. But that's the point, because sometimes doing nothing, even for a short while, just allows your brain to come back online again. You're not abandoning the problem. What you're doing is creating better internal conditions from which to solve it. So regulate first, solve second. The next part is to look at, is this actually mine? Now, we've done episodes on boundaries before. This is a big topic all on its own, but condensed for this episode, asking yourself the next question, and it's a really important question when you do feel overwhelmed, is this actually mine to solve? And it's really, really important if you're somebody who's used to being responsible for everybody. Maybe you're the organizer, the fixer, the person everybody comes to. Maybe it's somebody you're close to and you're thinking, oh gosh, if I don't help solve this, and it's never going to get fixed and it's going to be impactful to me. And that's a really tricky place to be, because your brain starts adding other people's responsibilities to your mental load. And again, if you're a regular listener, you know that your mind doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's imagined. So if you're solving a problem for somebody else as if you are that person, your body's going to be responding in the same way. So high levels of cortisol and adrenaline being produced, even though it's not directly you who's being affected. And this isn't saying, oh, just don't care, not at all, but it's about everything in balance and in harmony. And I've had to really battle this myself. I've always been a prolific overgiver, over fixer, overthinker, keep everybody, happy and safe. And it's exhausting and it burns you out. But it can feel really challenging to sometimes say, this isn't mine to fix, because it then feeds into this whole good girl mentality and, I feel guilty and bad. We did a whole episode on that. And last week, that's kind of where I had to be on a number of occasions. It's like, I can't fix everything myself. Some of these problems belong to other people and they're going to need to do what they need to do. And I'll listen and I'll support, but I can't fix it for them. So, a question to ask yourself here, which can feel triggering, but again, is a really powerful question. If I stopped trying to manage everybody else's part of this, what would actually be left for me to deal with? And that's a really good way to start implementing a boundary, because other people's emotions aren't always yours to regulate. Other people's decisions aren't always yours to make. Other people's responsibilities don't automatically become yours when they're not dealing with them. And it is kind of being kind to that part of your brain that then flags up that you feel like you're being uncaring, being a bitch, just not being kind. And it doesn't mean that we don't help people, but there's a difference between supporting somebody and taking responsibility for their life. And if you're feeling completely overwhelmed, it can be really useful to mentally lay everything out and ask, mine, not mine, mine, not mine. Because sometimes you realize that half of the things that are keeping you awake don't actually belong to you. And again, with all of these things, I'm not saying it flippantly of like, oh yeah, just do this. Like, I get these things are hard, especially, like if it's, a partner, a business partner, a romantic partner, and, their financial situation could be impactive to yours. To suddenly say, okay, well, that's theirs to deal with, isn't an easy line to put in the sand. But again, that question of, is it mine? Is it not? Starts to just build up that dossier in your brain. The next thing is practicing and learning to say, I don't know yet. I think one of the biggest parts of self-trust is learning to tolerate this sentence, I don't know yet. And this is interesting because I think we often misunderstand self-trust. We think trusting ourselves means being decisive, knowing, yeah, I want this, making a decision, never questioning it, having absolute certainty. But I don't think that's how self-trust actually is. Because, of course, there will be periods in life where you genuinely don't know. There will be crossroads that you find yourself standing at. There will be situations that you've not experienced before. And there will be times like this where maybe you don't have all the information. And you may even find yourself in a situation where you have two different choices, but both have positives and both have negatives. So perhaps self-trust isn't, I know exactly what I'm going to do. Perhaps self-trust can sound more like, I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I trust myself to know when I need to. And that feels really different because now I don't need to force certainty. I don't need to interrogate myself until an answer appears. I don't need to ask 17 people what they think. In psychology, it's called an internal locus of control when we trust our own judgment. If we don't have that, we have what's called an external locus of control where we're seeking validation and answers from external sources. So these questions are really helping you build that internal locus of control where you do start to, trust yourself. I can listen, I can observe, I can gather information, I can check in with myself. How do I feel? I can give myself permission for things to unfold one step at a time. And I can learn to trust when a decision actually needs to be made, that I'll be able to make one. I think self-trust is also saying to yourself, maybe I might make the wrong decision, and that's okay too, as part of being human, because self-trust isn't about never getting anything wrong and being perfect. It's trusting yourself that even if something doesn't work out exactly as you'd hoped, you will deal with it. And that's a much more robust kind of safety. Because if your safety relies on always being able to predict the future correctly, you're going to spend your whole life trying to control things that you can't control. Whereas if your safety comes from whatever happens, I trust myself to respond accordingly. You don't need to know everything in advance. It really helps that part of your brain just to go, oh, okay, yeah, I think you've got a point here. And we learn through repetition. This isn't something you'll do once and nail. Of course, it takes time, repetition, therapy. So I want to share with you a little reset. Again, use this myself last week. So if you're listening, nodding along, and you have got like 73 tabs open all at once, and at least 4 of them are playing music. You can't work out which one's which. That was me last week. Here is a little reset. So you can write these questions down if you want to, or you can just pause and think about them. So the first question is, what is actually happening right now? Not what might happen, not what you're frightened could happen, not what happened 6 months ago, your brain's attached to it. What are the facts? If I were a detective looking at this objectively, what could I actually prove to be true and right now? Then ask, what genuinely requires action today? Not this week, not eventually, today. There may be one thing, there may be nothing. Then, what am I trying to solve that hasn't happened yet? And this one can be the real light bulb moment, because how much of your mental energy is currently going into hypothetical problems? Has the what if actually happened? No. Then perhaps you don't need a strategy for that today. What part of this belongs to somebody else? So, like we said before, not everything is yours to carry. Are you trying to predict somebody else's behavior? Are you trying to manage their emotions? Are you trying to do their thinking for them? Are you trying to prevent them experiencing consequences? What can you hand back, even if it's just mentally? And then, what can I give myself permission not to know yet? So maybe you don't know whether you're going to stay, for example. Are you going to leave? Maybe you're going to take the job, move, start something, eat something, say yes, say no. Maybe you just don't know. And can that be okay for today? Not forever, just today. And then finally, before you make another decision, what does my body need? Do I need to move? Do I need to eat? Do I need to sleep? Do I need to go outside, to breathe, to cry? Crying can be hugely cathartic. When we cry, we release cortisol from our tears. So, sometimes you've had like a really big cry, and then afterwards you feel like, oh, I feel so much better. That can be why, obviously, crying extensively when you can't stop crying all the time, yeah, okay, that's a different story. Maybe it's being really firm with yourself and saying, put your phone down, get off your phone, go and have a shower. Showers are great ways of regulating. Sit quietly somewhere. Do I just need 20 minutes when nobody wants anything from me? Because again, going back to that mantra, regulate first, solve second. And a reset doesn't always mean going backwards, which is the final thing I want to talk about today. We talk a lot about resetting, getting back, ourselves back on track, getting back to normal, getting back to ourselves. And sometimes that is exactly what we need. But sometimes I wonder whether we're too focused on getting back, because perhaps you're not supposed to go back to exactly where you were before. Maybe the difficult week taught you something. Maybe you noticed a pattern you hadn't seen before. Maybe it taught you and showed you that you've been taking responsibility for things that aren't yours. Maybe you realized you're exhausted from constantly trying to keep everybody else happy. Maybe a boundary suddenly becomes glaringly obvious. Maybe it's you've tolerated for years a certain situation that now is totally intolerable. Maybe you don't have a big answer yet to the problem, but something is becoming clearer. And instead of asking, how do I get back to myself? Maybe the question becomes, what is this showing me about the person I'm becoming? Because change doesn't always arrive as one enormous, brave decision. Sometimes it can be incredibly quiet. It could be that one boundary, that one no, that one yes, that one moment where you don't explain yourself, you just leave it as it is. The one evening where you decide you're not going to spend 3 hours analysing something. That one situation where you notice yourself not abandoning your own judgment, trusting yourself. The time you decide to choose yourself, there's so many different options. Because we can spend so much time waiting for circumstances to change before we allow ourselves to change, waiting for somebody else to behave differently, somebody else to understand waiting for permission, for certainty, to feel, fearless, wait until we know exactly where we're going. But your life doesn't have to wait for everybody else to change first. You can begin changing your relationship with yourself now, and you can do that by listening to yourself differently. You can stop carrying things that aren't yours, set that boundary, take one small step, and you can allow the rest to remain unknown for a little while. And I think the one small step thing is really important. Last week, when I just felt like I had so much going on, I was thinking, oh gosh, I've got to do this. I need to go for a walk. I need to get my steps in. And I was like, rah. And I was like, just one thing, one small step, like go find your trainers. Okay, fine. Then what's my next step? Right, next step. And it just makes it feel more manageable. So if you've listened to this episode and you've got to the end and you feel like there's just a lot at the moment, I want you to remember this. You don't have to have it figured out today. You don't have to have everything figured out today. You don't need to know exactly where you'll be in 6 months. You don't need to predict somebody else's next move. You don't need to solve problems that haven't happened yet. You can give yourself permission to just be. And about practicing coming back to what is true today, what needs my attention, what belongs to me, what can wait. And remember, regulate first, solve second. And again, reminding you that trust, I'm reminding you that clarity doesn't always come from thinking harder. Sometimes clarity comes when we stop chasing it and allow the noise to settle, the dust to settle, the urgency to pass. Because it's in those moments we then create enough space where we can hear ourselves again. You don't have to have it all figured out. And sometimes the next step is simply giving yourself permission to stop trying to find the next step. So I hope you found that episode useful. I think for me last week, the whole mantra regulate fast, solve second became, literally my mantra of the week. So yes, I hope this helped and I hope you're in a calm headspace now. And again, with all these things, it does take practice. I'm not saying that you should practice it once and never nailed it, not at all. And if you are dealing with turbulent times, if you have listened to this and thought, actually, I could do with some more support and guidance, please reach out. These are situations that I support many of my clients in. And like I've shared today, I'm not better than anybody else. Sometimes I might be a few steps ahead. And sometimes I have to reset myself. We're human. But it would be amazing to share with you how I work. If you're interested in working with me, all the details are linked below in the show notes, as well as all my social media details, blah, blah, blah. It's all there. And lots of other resources. And if you haven't, please rate and share the podcast. It really helps me to get out to even more people. So I hope you have a gentle, calm week, and I look forward to speaking to you all again soon. Take care.